was having a similar conversation last week about the rules and how the rules have become now so ridiculously complex that nobody really knows what they are. I was talking to John Rental one day and I explained to him I didn't know what would happen if I got off a train in Newcastle. Would I be able to go to a bar? And he said it's perfectly straightforward. He says everybody knows what the rules are. And then he said, well, you can't go into a bar with somebody else. You can't meet somebody on the train and go into a bar with them, but you can have a drink with them on the train. I said, what about if I go to the bar and sit outside? He said, I don't know. So there we are. He doesn't know. Neil wrote a piece at the weekend in the Sunday Times in which he said there are 5 people in his family. He doesn't really know if he was to invite somebody else into his house as the 6th person, in the rule of 6, who that 6th person would be. Let's talk to him now to see if he's figured it out. Neil, a very good morning to you.
Hello. I'm just about driven myself doolally up here. I don't know which way is up anymore.
Yeah,
that's a fact.
No, I know. I mean, I was chuckling when I was reading it because it's exactly what I was kind of articulating last week. That it has a sort of rhythm to it, the way you wrote it as well. It's like, can I do this? Can I do that? Who can I do that with? Or can I not do it with that person? Can we get that person in? I mean, it is kind of comical now.
Yeah, I suppose for the people that are doing the making of the rules, and that's their job, and they're doing that all day, every day. They can, that's their preoccupation, and they can stay on top of it because it's all they think about for reasons we can understand. But for everybody else who's trying to get on with whatever they're trying to get on with, it's in the nature of rules of a game. Once you learn the rules of a game, that's the rules of football, the rules of Scrabble, then you know where you are and you can live within that. But the fact that the rules keep changing, people have got too much else to be getting on with, means that at any given moment, you don't know if you've missed a rule change. So at any given moment, you could be in the wrong quite innocently, just because what you were allowed to do yesterday or last week is now strictly verboten.
Yeah.
You didn't keep up with the latest broadcast from whoever or wherever, and there you are, you're offside.
Right.
You didn't know it.
Right. Well, I mean, when you get to these ridiculous situations where a burger bar in London gets fined £1,000 or whatever it is because they took too long to put the salad on the burger, and by the time they served it up, it was 4 minutes past 10. And suddenly there's a COVID marshal there handing out a fine, and you go, "Well, this has reached literally idiotic proportions."
We've been coming and going from restaurants and places around Stirling, hospitality places, and they're all tearing their hair out.
Yeah.
Apart from anything else, the 10 o'clock cut-off, to some extent, it sounds all right in a way. You think, well, 10 o'clock, but the reality for people running restaurants is that they've got to start getting rid of people really by about 9:15.
Yeah.
And it's at precisely the point in the evening when it comes to making money and maximising your profit in that industry, that as people have loosened up and they're thinking about having that other bottle of wine or ordering a round of brandies or whatever, that those places depend on that as a very rich hour between 10 and 11 or between 10 and midnight or whatever. And now they've got to be hustling people out the door, and they've got to be slipping the bowl on the inside of the door at 1 minute to 10.
Right.
So in reality, their earning window, it starts to stop at about 9 o'clock.
And also their bookings window starts to stop at around about 8:15 because they can't take any more bookings after that, really.
And we've got, we were thinking about getting the kids away for a week away during the second half of the school holiday up here, and we made some tentative arrangements for that. But as you say, yesterday or earlier in the week, suddenly the spectre was there of a circuit breaker lockdown, whatever on earth that means, and whatever effect it might have. And we thought, well, that's the ball up on the slates again.
Right.
And now we don't know, because if you're going to go away and do a self-catering thing, you've got to think about things like maybe getting a Tesco shop booked, to deliver, because even if you get to the place you want to go to, all the restaurants and pubs might be locked down or shut down, so you need to be self-sufficient.
Yeah. Well, we're the same. I mean, we went to Turnberry at last Christmas, which was great. First time we'd been away really for Christmas properly, where we didn't do the Christmas thing at home. And we thought maybe we'd pop up there for half term. But then I actually thought to myself, to be honest, I'm not sure if I went to Scotland, whether I might get stuck there. And Nicola Sturgeon might somehow close the border. I mean, that's how mad it is.
This thing about being handled as a foreign nation situation, when we talked about that way back, I understood the thinking there. But I think increasingly, the fact that you get not only are the rules changing all the time, but as you move, if you're in Scotland, or if you're in England, or if you're in Wales, or presumably if you're in Northern Ireland or whatever, there's variations within variations. And this fact that you've maybe caught something that's come out of Westminster, you've maybe heard something that Matt Hancock has said, or Boris Johnson has said, but you've then got to cross-reference it up here with what the First Minister here might say next,
right,
or what you've already said that you haven't heard.
Right.
It's a Gordian knot of complexities that I just don't see how everyone's going to end up getting caught out, because nobody except the people setting the rules are spending 24 hours a day keeping up with it.
No, and in the case of Miss Ferrier, of course, the SNP MP, she may or may not have known the rules, but she certainly broke pretty much all of them. That's just another example of the kind of thing that makes people, reasonable people, have absolutely no faith in authority. You get one, she's the latest one to stumble into that tar pit, but it's been one person after another who ought to have been an exemplar of best behaviour that just demonstrably did whatever they felt like doing in the moment because of their own personal circumstances, which is essentially the point of it. That is the problem in a nutshell. You know, she was running variables through her head, making decisions about what she thought she had to do for her. And that meant that the consequence of that was she just broke a whole string of rules. Yeah. And now, you know, the impression up here, she's still in position, she's still getting a salary, and that just seems to happen across the board. Nobody actually seems to be liable, or none of the people in authority seem to be liable for the consequences of their actions. No. Meanwhile, some poor Joe out in the street that, you know, that talks to the wrong person or spends too long in the wrong place, you know, could end up with a £10,000 fine. Yeah. Well, I got on the tube today because I'm going to take my producer to the pub to help celebrate her birthday, right? So I thought I'm not going to bring the car. And as I walked into the tube station, I saw a new sign, and there's a pillar, and it's quite a big tube station, so it's not a narrow space or anything. And it says, please do not stand here. This is for your own safety. I'm like, I immediately just wanted to stand there for a minute and see what happened, you know?
I've got the thing that keeps coming back to me at the moment. I don't know if you've heard that story about how in Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, he doesn't matter in the story. If you take Indiana Jones out of the story, the Nazis get Marion's necklace, they dig in the right place, right. They get the Lost Ark, they take it to the island, they open it, and the wrath of God deals with them.
Right.
That's what would have happened if Indiana Jones wasn't there.
Right.
So in the film, Indiana Jones is just running about, getting in the way, looking heroic,
right.
Shooting at people, getting into fights, jumping in and out of tombs. Right. But it doesn't matter. And I feel as if the leaders, Nicola, Sturgeon, Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock, and they're like Indiana Jones, but not as good looking, right. And not as well dressed. Right. They're just getting in the way. And it feels like in the meantime, the virus is going to run its course. Nature's going to take its course. There's that, you mentioned that letter, another letter that's been signed by 4,000 scientists. Yeah. And some of them are saying herd immunity is like night follows day. It's inevitable, they say. Some of them, it's like gravity. You can't avoid herd immunity. Now, others of them are saying, well, no, you can't necessarily rely on herd immunity. And just because you've had the disease once doesn't mean that you can't catch it again. So you've got that split decision. But if those ones are right, that we're going to end up with herd immunity as an inevitability, you know, I mean, some of the virologists are saying that any virus, it doesn't want to be lethal because if you kill your host, you're homeless.
Yes.
So it's in the interest of a virus to become non-lethal because all they really want is somewhere warm and moist to live. They just need a happy host. And so in all likelihood, as I understand it, given a couple of years, COVID will be non-lethal, and we'll all just have to live with it the way we live with so many other viruses.
We might all have it in the same way that we would all have it if we got a vaccination, you know, because we were told way back at the beginning that probably everybody will get it, and that the reason for the original lockdown was to make sure that we didn't all get it at once and people didn't overwhelm the health service. I understand that logic, I get all that, but now when we're hearing that lockdowns actually don't work, in fact, they increase in infection rates in some areas, when we hear that students being locked down in their halls of residence is actually not stopping it spreading, clearly you can't stop it spreading. I mean, that's the only sensible conclusion to come to.
Yeah, it is. It's the Indiana Jones factor.
Yeah.
The virus seems to be, it's running through its own, it's taking its own course. And as you said, as we were told at the beginning, they had to flatten the curve, so that we didn't all, so that all the illness and death wasn't all happening on the same day. But at no point did anybody say those people wouldn't get ill and die.
Right.
They just didn't want them all to get ill and die in the same week.
Right.
When it would overwhelm the National Health Service. And gradually, whether you like it or not, until they get this fabled vaccine, now that's a leap of faith, will they? And if so, when?
Right.
But until they do, people are gradually going to come in contact with the virus, and for whatever reasons, with those people's immunities or their underlying health conditions or whatever, or their age, they're going to get ill and die. Nobody ever said when they talked about flattening the curve that it was going to save lives. It was just going to stop loss of life happening all at once and overwhelming the National Health Service.
Well, I still think that the main kind of, shall we say, sort of driving force was those scenes from northern Italy, which came out right at the beginning, where you could see bodies piling up in hospital corridors, rooms full of the dead, and lorries having to take them away in the middle of the night, because no politician, as I said at the time, could probably survive that in this country. Nobody would want to see that, and it would be horrifying. So they just desperately wanted to make sure that there was no overcrowding, and there never was. I mean, those Nightingale hospitals were never used.
Yeah, and this thing, I keep on going back over this idea about save the NHS. In the event of a national health emergency, what is the NHS for?
Right.
It's like people that keep the plastic covers on their couch rather than use it, rather than enjoy it. At what point are you going to take the covers off and use this thing in the way that it's intended? What save the NHS for what? It's like if you had a crisis of faith, and a religion might say, well, let's just make sure all the church buildings are in good nick and never the congregation.
Yeah. I mean, I liken it. My analogy to that is don't run any trains in case they crash or become overcrowded.
Or wear out.
Yeah.
Don't run the trains because the wheels might get worn out.
Right.
What is this? What are you saving? If you've got a national health service that people have been paying into for generations, that absorbs and needs billions of pounds all the time, if we're going to have it, when else are you going to use it?
Right.
Possibly to the point of destruction if needs be.
Yeah.
But in the case of a global health emergency.
Yeah. But you see, I've always thought, Neil, that these organisations like the Chief Medical Officer's Office, Public Health England, they've been working towards this for a while. They've tried this kind of preventative medicine, as they call it, but which is actually telling you how to live your life. Don't smoke, don't drink too much, don't get too fat, don't be a drain on the health service. Well, get stuffed, because I pay my taxes so that I can be a drain on the health service if I so wish.
Yeah, you can't have it both ways. You can't charge people for something that you then don't let them use when they need it.
Right. Exactly.
Where's the point of that? You either have to have something that's somehow free, that doesn't cost the user anything, in which case you can deny the user its use if you so wish. But if you're charging somebody for the existence of a service, you can't, at the very moment when they need it, say, I'm saving that for a rainy day.
No, and they waste bucket loads of money. I heard a story from a friend of mine the other day who called me and said he's got his girlfriend's Portuguese. Her father is going into hospital for some kind of operation. He doesn't speak very good English, so they said that they'll get an interpreter for him. And she said, well, I can come in and be the interpreter because he'd probably quite like me to be around anyway. They said, no, you can't do that because you're not COVID safe, right? However, they haven't said that they're going to test the interpreter to make sure the interpreter's COVID safe, and the interpreter costs £500 a day. And that's the NHS.
Yeah, so this illogicality, if that's a word, of the way in which everything is being saved and spared around keeping the NHS for an emergency.
Right.
This is the emergency.
Right.
This is when we need it. And even if we used it to the point of destruction, well, at least we had it.
Right.
And at the moment, I mean, obviously there's this ridiculous, terrifying situation where you've got health ministers saying you can't have cancer treatment until we get to a better place with COVID. And we're just having to face up to the reality that people are going to die of coronary disease.
Yeah, I mean, how is that acceptable? If it's not acceptable, what's the point of saving lives if you're going to kill more lives by saving the other lives?
It's this preoccupation with the one threat to life.
Right.
As though the other threats to life have somehow been put on hold as well. And they haven't. Cancer and heart disease and depression and suicide and all the rest of the terrible ailments that befall mankind are still out there doing their thing, unobstructed, because we've all got to dedicate all resources, all time and all attention, crash the economy, periodically face lockdowns and all the rest of it, just because of the arrival of the latest new virus.
Yeah.
And viruses have been arriving in amongst our species on planet Earth since the beginning. But never before have we decided that this is the one for which everything else must be set aside. Economies must tank, people's livelihoods must be destroyed, people must be shut in their homes till depression gets the better of them. They have to die for want of every other available treatment because COVID is number one and will be number one until we've got a vaccine for it. I don't remember being asked to vote for that.
No. Because I think also that it speaks to an arrogance that the political class has now kind of adopted, that they can stop things from happening or they can make things happen and everything sort of is done at their behest, if you like. How about you just admit that you can't stop it happening and then you work from there rather than saying we must stop this from spreading because they can't stop it.
No, evidently they can't. It would appear that from the moment this virus appeared among us, that a certain number of people in every population were eventually going to be, we're going to be adversely affected by it. We're going to get those ones who, for whatever reason, couldn't survive it, were going to be harvested by it. And all of these efforts, lockdowns, the catastrophe for the economy, all the other collateral damage that's been done, we were supposed to absorb it because we were being reassured that if the authorities were allowed to do all the things they wanted to do, they could fix it, and they can. And I would put good money on the fact that a couple of years from now, the death toll in every part of the world will be proportionally the same as everywhere else.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right.
COVID-19, one way or another, with or without intervention, will have taken a given percentage of every population, and we will look back wide-eyed and shaky at what we have done in the intervening period. Smoke and ruin of our economies and society, and we will not have been able to save a single life. We'll have delayed them, we'll have caused them to happen at different times, but whatever it is, 0.1% of everyone's population will have been taken by COVID.
I think that's absolutely right. And there certainly seems to be evidence from what I can see of Nicola Sturgeon's kind of rowing back slightly today, which is what we think she's going to do from this circuit breaker lockdown, right? That she's now frightened of doing that because it may be a step too far for her politically. She might also not be doing it because she can't afford to do it because they'd have to somehow come up with another furlough scheme and they don't really have the money for that. But I'm wondering, the more pressure that gets put on by people like these 4,000 doctors to people like Boris Johnson, he will bend because he doesn't like being told he's unpopular. He doesn't like, if enough people start telling him, he might just see the light.
Yeah, it's impossible to tell now whether decisions are being taken in light of the latest scientific understanding or whether they're being taken in the light of political expediency. Now, of course, the politicians are saying, oh no, we're doing this because the scientists, this is the latest, this is the news just in. But more and more of the population are thinking, no, this is political expediency. And this isn't just to do with COVID. History has shown that if you keep on lying to people, or if you keep on giving people duff information, eventually the people just don't believe anything they're being told. And once people don't believe anything they're being told, they're made they're denied action. They're unable to weigh up situations and make decisions for themselves because they don't trust anything that they're being told. And whatever happens with COVID, in the future, in the years ahead, it's going to be very, very difficult for politicians to regain any kind of credibility at all. Because this moving picture, that this shimmering mirage of the supposed solution to COVID has just left everybody dropping their shoulders and saying, "Oh, they're just making this up as they go along now."
Well,
and they might not be, but that's the impression that's being. That's the impression that more and more people are having. And in the future, the next time there's anything to be handled, and the politicians start telling us that this is how we should handle it, based on the COVID experience, too many people are going to say, "Yeah, he's just saying that."
Yeah. Well, it doesn't help when the chief medical officer actually admits that he came out with some numbers which were meant to scare the public because it was a projection, except it wasn't in some ways a prediction, and you go, what the hell are you talking about? You've just literally plucked a number out of the air, as was the rule of 6 plucked out of the air, as was the 10 p.m. curfew plucked out of the air. So you're not wrong to say that they are doing it as they go. I just don't think they've got a plan at all.
You always, your watchwords all the time are common sense.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely right. And that the population have been denied the application of their own common sense. And that politicians and the scientists, whoever they are, have taken it upon themselves to say, no, people's common sense is neither here nor there. We are going to lay down the law. That law is going to change on an hourly basis for days and weeks on end. But that is going to be how we handle this. So you take away agency from people. And this common sense is absolutely vital at all times. And if the authorities had just acknowledged and worked with the common sense of the population, it was established very early on that the elderly were very, very vulnerable to this, and that people who were overweight or diabetes or an underlying health condition or a heart condition, very, very vulnerable. And from the beginning, common sense would have empowered people to say, right, we'll look after them. We'll make sure those people are out of the way, they're out of harm's way, and the rest of us will get on with life so that we can keep earning the money and paying the taxes that keep the wheels on the bus.
Yeah, absolutely.
But instead, the scientists sent everybody home to their bedrooms for a year.
Yeah.
and now we've got the situation that we've got. And ultimately, it's because they wouldn't allow people to use and apply common sense. And common sense has been keeping the species alive for 200,000 years. We're still here.
I know. Unbelievable stuff. Neil, listen, we've come to the end once again, but brilliant as ever. Thank you very much indeed. Neil Oliver, of course, archaeologist, TV presenter of Coast, a man that speaks an awful lot of common sense. Luckily, we are here in the home of common sense,